G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here with the second video of the Moderoid 1/12 scale power loader from Aliens build. I have primed all the bits and pieces using Mr. Surfacer 1200, and the reason I went with this primer over the SMS primer I usually use is because you can sort of control how thin it is by adding thinner to it. So the SMS stuff's already pre-thinned and it's quite thin, so this stuff you can make a little bit thicker just to sort of fill a lot of those sort of scratches that you create when you're sanding. So you can see here I've been doing some work, checking the seams. For the most part it's actually come up reasonably well. So I'm sort of focusing on areas where I know it's going to be seen. So of course Ripley, these seams have come up really well. It's sort of almost invisible. So down the sides of her legs, of course, there were seams that went all the way down there, down her sides, her hips. So there, all those seams are sort of gone now, which is good. The other thing that I was kind of really concerned about were these pistons. So these are the pistons that go at the bottom of the feet, and they had hollow parts in here, so I've had to fill those, and yeah, I've had to sort of sand again and use a little bit more filler. And for doing the patch repairs, I'm using Mr. Surfacer 500, which is a bit thicker. And what I do is, you can see on the top here, I literally just dab it on with a brush. So you can see that sort of blob there, and then what I'll do is I will go over that with the sander until it's nice and smooth. And when you're doing this sort of work, you've really got to kind of look at the diminishing returns on the work that you do. You know, it's sort of especially a kit like this, which, you know, I know I'm going to be weathering quite substantially. So you really just need to sort of concentrate on those seams where, you know, they're going to be visible. Not that a lot of this top bit's going to be visible, but you don't want to be, you don't want to be sort of spending time working on seams that are never going to be seen, or that are going to be covered in a heap of junk, or a heap of gunk, I should say. So for example, the seam in here, you can see that down the middle of the two halves. I didn't worry about that at all, because of course that's where the cushions go over, so you're never going to see it. So I've been working away at just sort of sanding a lot of these areas, but most of them have come up pretty well. Yeah, I think they'll be okay. All right, there's another one. Yeah, so these end bits were interesting. If I show on the other one, you can see there's very little sort of seam there now. That's sort of gone. Slight shadow of a seam there, which I'm not going to worry about too much. And as much as I love Mr. Surfacer, the one issue I have with it is that it tends to gunk up your sanding sticks. So just be aware of that. Try to keep the sander nice and flat to the surface. This side too. And you know, this is probably my least favourite part of the hobby, sanding and cleaning seams. However, it is satisfying. So when you've done it properly and, you know, you've got a good finish on the kit, it makes it all worthwhile. So, as the saying go, you know, no sense of achievement without some hard work. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot more time sort of priming it again and sanding it back unless I see something really horrific. I think we're almost there. But what I will be doing is, for all the bits that are going to be yellow, I'm actually going to be priming them white, just because yellow is, you know, quite transparent, the yellow paint. So I'll be painting this all white. I just use the Mr. Surfacer Grey because it's a lot easier to see where you've missed spots with the seams. But for the purpose of putting yellow down, I want to make sure it's a nice white primer surface. The other thing I was worried about was the inside of this safety cage. Now I do have some pitting in here. I do have like a little bit of work to do just to clean that up, but it's actually come up pretty well considering it's quite difficult to sand. So yeah, I've got a little bit of work to do in there. And like I've mentioned previously, this one is a doozy to you know, sort of clean up, just because it's sort of all awkward shapes. And just get in there with sanding sponge. The other problem I have is keeping this bit of masking tape on. Just whatever the material of the LED is, to me, a tape really doesn't want to stick to it. So I'm a bit worried about it sort of flying off when I'm airbrushing. Okay, all right. So I've still got some sanding to do, but most of the hard work's done. So I want to talk a bit about the colours I'll be using. For the majority of the loader, I'll be using SMS School Bus Yellow. This is kind of a nice, you know, bit of safety yellow, I guess. It's probably a little bit warmer than the actual thing, but I think once I weather it, it'll look fine. So it'll be a, you know, reasonably bright yellow. For all the metallics, so for example, this piston here, these end bits are actually yellow, so it's only the stem of the piston that's actually going to be sort of chrome. So I'm going to do all the metal bits first, and then you can see sort of on these piston pieces as well. I'm going to do all the chrome part, or the silver first, and then mask that off, and then do the header bits yellow. So for the piston rods, I'm going to be using SMS Metallic Super Silver. And then for a lot of the black parts, like the coverings on the back here, I'll paint that first and then mask it off, and then do the yellow over the top. For that, I'll be using SMS Camo Black. So they're the main sort of colours of the loader. There's also, of course, Ripley, which I've got to paint up, and I'll talk about the colours of those a bit later on. So I painted the silver on all the piston rods and other sort of details, like the tops of the fork tines here. So I've masked them off. Some of them I'm still working on. If we look at this one here, this base bit should be probably yellow, and then it's just the piston rod silver, so I've painted that silver first and then I'll mask that off. There's also these bits that go on the back, they're like antennas. It's just this little top bit here that sort of gets masked off, and the rest of it gets painted yellow. On the top of these pistons, there's sort of a ball joint, so I've just masked that off, so that's silver ball joint. The rest of the piston casing's yellow, piston cylinder. And for the back of the legs, we've got this what I painted in camo black, sort of a bit of a cover on the joint here, and so I've just masked that off there. So nothing, you know, nothing too complex in the masking. Masking is all sort of pretty straightforward, which is kind of a nice change. So normally I just lay a bit of tape on the table, and using tweezers, and then normally I'll just wind the tape up, sort of wrap it around. So in this case, these ones are nice and easy to mask, nothing too complicated here. Just wrap it around following that line, and we get a nice clean delineation between the silver and the yellow at the base of it. Now for this one here, I normally do something a little bit different, where I'll put the tape down first. So I'm going to use this wider tape, and then I'll lay it down in the space here, just to get it started, and burnish it down just with a toothpick. Now you want to burnish it down reasonably well. And here it's a bit tricky because it's going to fold the tape up a bit. And normally when I'm doing masking like this where I've got to cut around the edges, I'll use a surgical scalpel. I just tend to find that these are better for cutting tape. You know, especially if you've got like a brand new blade, makes a big difference. So I'm just sort of finding the edge, just following it along. Yeah, probably need to clean this up a little bit. And I'll just go back and burnish it down again and find where I've got some issues. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. I think this bit down the bottom can be trimmed. Now, given the nature of this vehicle and how dirty it gets, I don't think, I'm not too worried if the masking isn't super spot on. I'll be able to sort of cover up any small blemishes with a, you know, with a bit of weathering. But you want to get it as close as possible. I'll just get a little bit of tape in the corner. There we go. So yeah, so far, you know, there's nothing sort of really complex about the masking, which is nice. You know, nice simple shapes to mask, lots of cylinders, and it's pretty straightforward. So once I've finished masking all these pieces off, anything that's yellow will get a primer coat in white, and I'll be using SMS Surfacer White. And then I'll go over with the school bus yellow. I've done the yellow coat on the bulk of the loader, and yellow is sort of notoriously difficult to paint just because normally it's quite transparent. So I took a few coats, but you know, I'm pretty happy with the colour and the way it's come up. I think once a matte coat goes down over the top of it, it should be really good. So I've started taking the masking off for all the silver bits that I did. So just to quickly take you through, you know, normally when I'm masking, I'll get a sharp tipped pair of tweezers. So these are Tamiya ones. It just makes it so much easier for getting under the tape and just lifting it up. Because I'm using lacquer-based paints, of course, I've not had any issues with paint lifting. So I actually masked all these sort of few hours after I painted them, and I haven't had any issues with them at all. So I find that masking these particular types of paints an absolute pleasure. In the past, when I've used water-based acrylics, I have had some issues with paint peeling, but you know, these ones has been a problem. I do apologise, you can probably hear the cockies in the background. Again, it's just that time of the year, they're nesting around here, and they cause a hell of a ruckus. And in case you're interested, they are a protected species in Australia, so you know, they are native. But doesn't stop them from being very noisy. Okay, so there's the cover on the back. I definitely think masking that was the easiest way to go. It's a lot cleaner. Unlike the cushions that sort of go in here, I couldn't just drop this thing in, so it really had to be sort of clamped together. There are still a couple of seam lines visible, but they're in areas where they're not going to be seen. So the back here came up pretty well, and it looks like the foot as well has come up really clean. I can't see any sign of a seam there, so that was the goal, so that's good. Let's see what this one's like. This one's good. Yeah, so same thing. The There's a little bit of a seam on the top, which I didn't sort of go overboard with filling just because I knew it wouldn't be seen, but everything else looks really good. So I'm glad I went down that path. And I've got to say, the process of actually sort of referring to, you know, still shots from the movie to make sure I've got the details, you know, as close as I can get them. It's actually been a really fun process. Alright, so that's sort of, you know, the masking taken care of. Now the next thing I need to do is put these together. So I think the forks or claws, whatever you want to call them, I think I really need to put these together before I sort of put a gloss coat on it. So that'll be next. So I've put one of these claws, forks, whatever they're called, together, and you can see there's this seam along here, which I do want to try and clean up as best I can. It is kind of a bit unsightly. You know, now I've sort of painted everything. I should be able to isolate this area reasonably well and fill that seam. So there's a couple of things to keep an eye out when you're putting these things together. So I've sort of learnt this the hard way, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I did. The way it sort of works is that the two tines are sort of put on these. They've got these rails that are got a tooth to them. The tooth. Remember the tooth. Right. Got that way. And so when I did the original build, one of the problems I had was that it wasn't sort of centered, so it didn't work the way it was supposed to. But we've got these two sort of teeth rails, and then we've got this bar here, and this goes a particular way. They actually call it out on the instructions, so it feeds through both of these. And I've got to say, this is another reason why using lacquer-based paints really comes into its own, because if I was to slide this beam through using water-based acrylics, I can tell you now most of it would have scraped off by now, but I haven't put a gloss coat or anything on that, and it's just holding up really well, so that's good. Alright, and then we have these two metal poles, and they slide in, and there's sort of a couple of small grooves on the bar that they align to. And you just got to watch out with these, because when you're sort of clamping it all together, these can slip out a little bit. So you just want to make sure they're lined up right. Okay, then we have sort of the casing that holds all of this together. There's a poly cap that sort of goes in there, although they'll probably pop out. And this whole assembly sort of slides in. There's a couple of slots here where the bar assembly goes in. Just want to make sure it's seated properly. And the poly cap just fell out. What I do, just make sure that these tines here are sort of centered. Doesn't have to be spot on just yet, but when you go to put the small cog in that sort of puts it all together, you want to make sure it's as centered as possible. So then you get this tiny little cog. It has a hole in there that it seats in. And it can be a bit tricky sort of getting it in the right place. So I just want to make sure that's sort of centered. Yep, that's good. Put the poly cap back in. Make sure these metal poles are not sort of sliding out of place. And then we clamp the whole lot together. So the tines should sort of meet in the middle like that, and when you pull them all the way out, they should both butt up against the ends here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is run a bit of glue in here, and then try and clamp it up. I know I'm going to have to retouch the paint, and that's fine. I knew I was going to have to do that, but I do really want to sort of minimise these seams, given that I've sort of got rid of the seams everywhere else. Yeah. All right, I'm just going to grab a couple of pegs just to see how well these will clamp it together. I think that'll need something a bit more substantial. Yeah, I reckon that'll be the way to go. So once I get some glue in there, I can clamp that up with a couple of these clamps. Alright, so let's get some extra thin. Now the extra thin will make a mess of the paint that's already there, but that's alright because I am going to use some putty to clean that all up and sand it back anyway. Alright, so I think I'm going to I'm going to have quite a bit of putty work to do in there, but let's see if we can get another clamp on it. Give it the clamps! Alright, here we go. Looks like quite the mess, but so I'll go ahead, glue the other one, and then the next step will be I'll probably just end up using some Mr. Surfacer 500, maybe some white putty. I'll see how I go, just to fix up that seam, and then I can sort of go in and touch that up. But I sort of really want to get all this stuff done before I put gloss coats and then start the weathering process. Alright, time for some detail painting. And there's probably not a lot of detail painting in this kit. I mean, most of the load is sort of yellow, and a lot of the detail will come up when you weather it. But there are a few little bits and pieces that I'd like to sort of do a little bit more work on. So starting off with the welder. Now this is painted in camo black. I'll bring up an image here. You can see there's just a hint of sort of metal at the base here. So for that I'm going to be using Vallejo Metal Color, burnt iron. And also the parts where the frame sort of plugs in at the bottom. There's sort of that hint of a metallic band there, if you have a look at this image. So again, I'm going to use the burnt iron for that. Now on the control stick, the detail isn't really that flash on it at this scale, but there will be a little bit of a hint of sort of metal on here. I think there's supposed to be a little, yeah, it looks like there's a little indicator of a safety stroke, which I'm not going to bother painting or doing anything with, but I might just put a bit of hint of metal on that bit that protrudes there. So for that I'll probably end up using Vallejo Metal Color Silver. So there's the two control sticks. Now we can see here when Ripley starts up the loader, she actually punches in a number of buttons to start up the loader. So these details are actually provided on the kit. So on the arm here you can see these buttons. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint them Vallejo Mecha Color Phantom Grey 69040, and then I might do a bit of dry brush with a little bit of silver or a little bit of burnt iron, so it'll just be nice and subtle to bring out those buttons. So it is important that you get these arms around the right way, because that detail is on Ripley's left hand side, so you want to make sure that that's right. And of course there's the track that the the handles sort of slide up and down on. Now the next one is the belt, and this is probably where the most detail painting will go in. So first of all, the colour that I use, the blue, it's actually a sort of a custom mix. So custom mix number 7 that I made up, and that is made up of these two colours, bright blue and blue by SMS. Now for the mix, I think it was 33% bright blue and then 66%. So basically 2/3 blue and 1/3 bright blue. And that's how I sort of got that colour. It's probably a little bit too bright. I don't know. Well, once it gets matted down, I think it'll darken up a little bit and we can sort of throw some washes over it. So if you have a look, you know, at some of these pics here, there's actually quite a bit of detail going on in these straps. So first of all, the clasp has sort of silver. So for that I'll be using Vallejo Mecha Color 77.724 silver. And there's also sort of a red, it's almost like an anodized aluminium part of the clasp. So for that I'm actually going to use metallic red by Vallejo Mecha Color range, so 69066 metallic red. I may have to paint that white before I put the metallic red in there. It might not go over the blue particularly well. The other thing is there's sort of some adjustment bits here on the belts that have to be, they'll be silver as well. And around the edge banding here, that's actually black. So for that I'll be using just Ultimate Primer Gloss Black. So that's just along those edges. It's like a bit of piping or something that's along there. The other thing that I'm going to try, and I'm not sure if it's going to be successful or not, is you can actually see they've put the stitching detail on the top here. And so if you have a look at the screenshots from the film, it's actually a white stitching. So I'm going to give it a shot. I don't know how I'll go. It might end up being completely disastrous. But I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to paint it using Vallejo Mecha Color 69003 off-white. So with a very fine brush, and I'm going to try and do some of the stitching detail. So that will be a test for me, that's for sure. So that's the detail painting that I have to do, so I'll get cracking with it. The detail painting is now finished, as much as I'm going to do. Now, like I mentioned before, the belts are probably where the most sort of detail painting is required. Now, I did try to give a bit of an indication of white stitching, but it didn't really come up that well, so I think by the time I put a wash over it, it's probably going to disappear anyway. But we have the metallic parts of the, the clasp and the metallic red part in the middle. So that's come up well. There's also the black banding on the side of the belt part of it. Hand painted up the buttons that are on the side of the arm. So they're just in that dark grey. We've got a bit of burnt iron detail on the welding torch. Also, these are the parts where the cage sort of plugs into. I've just given a bit of an indication again with the burnt iron, a bit of metallic, just to mix it up a little bit. And then finally on these, which probably won't be seen anyway because I'll be using the other ones with that the hands go into, but just a bit of a metallic touch up there. So that's sort of the detail painting done. Now with all of this complete, I need to put a gloss coat over everything. So I need to give these, because these Vallejo's Mecha colours are water-based acrylics, I'm going to give these a lot of time to dry before I put a lacquer over the top of them. Gloss coat, and then onto some decals. I started work on the decals for this kit, so everything's had a gloss coat and it's ready for decals. And the decals are interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's some issues around licensing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, licensing a particular logo. And then there's also the variation in the decals you actually see on the power loader in the film. So the decals themselves, as you can see, I've sort of started working on a lot of them. They're fine, they go down really well. Just be very gentle with them. They can be a little bit fragile and tend to tear a little bit, but if you're patient with them, they're fine. So you sort of get an idea of, they look like and how they've sort of gone down. But as far as the pre-cutting of them is really nice, and around the forks, they're sort of pre-cut around that piece that protrudes out. Now this has still got some microsole on it, so it's still sort of a bit wrinkled and a bit wet looking. But yeah, so the pre-cut decals, they did a nice job of those. So first of all, I want to talk about the options they provide in the decal set, and they basically give you two sets of numbers. So they give you the number 4 and the number 2. Now, if you're following what happens in the actual film, Ripley only is ever seen using the number 2 loader. The number 4 is shown with Spunkmeyer when he's loading the missile in the dropship. But as far as the actual footage from the movie, it looks like that Ripley only used power loader number 2. Now, when we look at the actual logos or the decals that are on the loaders in the film, the number 4 has this text on the top of it and below it, so power loader number 4. Whereas when you look at the scenes in the movie, the number 2 doesn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, and you can see I've actually done it on this arm, I've trimmed those extra words off and positioned it sort of closer to what you see in the actual film. So I'm going to take my knife and trim these off. But just remember, if you're doing the number 4 one, it actually does have that text on it. So I guess Moderoid, we're just looking at having some sort of consistency with their decals. But I want to sort of get this as close as possible to what you see in the film. Okay, nice and close. Might hang on to those. You never know when you're going to need, some extra sort of decals like that. So I'm not going to worry about number 4 because that's just Spunkmeyer's loader. So I've got number 2. Now the next thing is I guess the elephant in the room is the fact that it's supposed to be a power loader made by the company Caterpillar. And in fact, in the movie, you can see where the pilot sits, there's actually the word Caterpillar. And they haven't obviously included this kit because they haven't had the ability to license it. And what's interesting is there's another Caterpillar logo on the leg. And this is the old Caterpillar logo, so, from when the movie was made. And the way they've actually done this in the decals is quite interesting. So what they've done is they've given you the circle device and then the lines in the middle. So obviously they've sort of looked at it and gone, we don't want to risk it with Caterpillar. We'll have the decals as sort of two separate elements. And again, there's a difference between power loader number 4 and number 2. Power loader number 4 has this text underneath the logo, whereas number 2 doesn't. So I'm going to trim this off again. I guess the thing is that, it would actually make sense that in universe they would actually have the same logos, the same decals on everything, but I'm sort of just going with what I see on the film. So, now for decals, I just use tap water. I don't bother using hot water or anything like that. And these ones I've found, you just let them soak for a little bit. They come away from the backing paper pretty quickly. But of course, if you heat the water, it just sort of speeds up the process a little bit. My usual spiel about decals, something that's really helpful are some flat-nosed tweezers like these. So these are specifically for decals. They make it a lot easier for getting the tweezers under the bits of paper the decals are on and moving them about. I'll obviously cotton bud, I'll use that to squeegee out any extra water. I use a toothpick for positioning the decal on the part, and then I'll use microset and microsol. So microset's what you put down first, and that just helps to prevent the surface tension from moving your decal around if it's sitting on a drop of water. Microsol helps to dissolve the carrier film and make the decal look a bit more like it was painted on. So that's sort of essentially the tools that I use for decaling. There's nothing sort of extra special about what I use. So I'm going to just check these decals just to see if they start moving on the paper. Yes, it looks like that one is moving, so I can sound. Now you don't need to use a special decal tray like this. The sort of water works really well. I think this is produced by Wave. The good thing about it is you can lift the tray up so you're not sort of chasing the decals around the water, which is why I prefer to sort of use that. So what I'm going to do is use some microset first, and I've got a dedicated brush for that, and I will brush in the areas where I'm going to put the decals. I've got the number 2s going there, and then the Caterpillar logo is going up here. So first of all, let's do the Caterpillar one, and I'll just wick off the extra water just using a bit of paper towel, and using a toothpick, just gently sort of easing it into place. And I want to make sure that I've got it in the same sort of the equivalent position as the other one. It doesn't matter, you're not going to see the left and right at the same time, but I'm going to get pretty close if I can. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. So what I'll do then is take a cotton bud and just gently roll it across the surface, and the water will squeegee out. So it also helps to get any sort of air that's trapped under it, get that out as well. And then once that's done, I'm going to leave that sit for a bit before I put the next part of the Caterpillar logo on. Next one is the number 2. So slide that into place. Again, I'm going to use the other side that I've done sort of for reference, try to get it pretty close. And it is sort of a strange position they've sort of put it in, watching the movie. But so again, just squeegee the water out. This one's a bit tricky because it goes right up into the edge, but I can just sort of dab it and get the water and the air out from underneath the decal. Okay. So now the Caterpillar logo, sort of the outline has had a bit of a chance to sit. The next thing I'm going to do is put the lines in. This is coming off a bit of paper. So the decals definitely have no trouble coming off the backing paper, that's for sure. Alright, so we need to orient this right so it reads as a C. And I didn't put any microset down for this one, just because I didn't want it to interfere with the existing decal that's underneath it. Right. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, there we have it. So the final step is to use the microsol. Water out of the way here. That microsol will just help the decals bed down. I mean, the good thing about this kit is that the decals, there's not too many that sort of go over curved surfaces or have to sort of go into panel lines. So they should bed down pretty well. While I'm at it, I might give another coat to the ones I've already done. So with this microsole, I tend to do multiple coats. So it's not as strong as some of the decal solutions you can get, but the fact that I can do it in multiple passes gives me a little bit more control over it. So it might take a bit longer than using something stronger, but I'm okay with that. Alright, I need to do it on this one as well. And normally you'll see the decals sort of wrinkle up a bit once you use microsole. Now these decals don't seem to be wrinkling as much, but they seem to be bedding down okay. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So you sort of get an idea of, yeah. So the decals are sort of interesting more, I guess, from the point of view of what you actually see in the film, and also how Moderoid or Good Smile Company have sort of got around the Caterpillar logo. It's just a shame they didn't do anything for the cockpit that was sort of similar, but I think that might have been maybe a bit too ambitious. So that's the decals. Once I've got all these sort of set in place, the next step is I'll put a gloss coat over the decaled areas just to protect them a bit. Now that everything's got a gloss coat on it ready for weathering, I thought it was a good opportunity to nail down the electronics that I'm doing on this project. So on the top bit of the cockpit is the clear orange part for the flashing light. Now in the movie this is not a strobe, it's actually a rotating light within the orange sort of cap. It's got a silver band, so I've just I masked this off and painted the silver there. So what I wanted was a lighting effect that actually looked like a rotating light as opposed to just a strobe. I was going to go around, use a strobing LED, but it didn't really look the business. So what I've done is, and yes, I could have made my own, but I ended up buying one of these, which is Light My Bricks Rotating 30cm Bit Light. And I'm not sponsored by this mob at all, but I believe they're a company, Light My Bricks. They do lighting kits specifically for Lego. So the great thing about this is that it all comes in one unit, and if I sort of show it here, it's all sort of on board there. Comes with a long lead, and I've just it actually comes with a plug on the end for plugging into whatever their power system is. I've just cut that plug off so I can use the wires to solder them directly. But if I hook this up to a battery, you'll see what the effect is, and I think it's going to be rather convincing. So you can see how it sort of looks like a rotating light, and that's exactly what I need. So that's what I'm going to be using for this, and there's a little bit of modification I had to do to this clear piece. It might be a bit hard to see, but I've had to actually drill out the center bit. There's two curved pieces in there, and I've just had to drill them out a little bit just so that this unit would actually fit in there. You don't have to line up, but basically I want it to sort of fit in there like so. So I've had to sort of drill that out a bit, otherwise it would sort of sit here as opposed to being right inside the unit. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to attach it in here, and I'll probably just end up using some UV resin for that. Now as far as the rest of the lighting goes, of course there is the what do you say, the fluoro. What I've done is I've set up a breadboard basically with all the lighting ready to go so that I can sort of check the resistors I need. So I'm going to hook up the rotating LED and make sure I don't short out anything. So I've hooked the rotating LED with a 620 ohm resistor, and I've done the same thing for the fluoro part in the cage. So it's probably a bit of an overkill, probably don't need resistors with that higher values, but I just want to make sure that the LEDs don't burn out. So if I plug this in, make sure I get the polarity in the right way, you can see that of course this is working, looks great. And you can also see the fluoro tube in there working. Pretty happy with that. So now it's sort of a matter of getting it all inside, you know, this part. So I've got plenty of space in there to wire everything up. So there'll be a hole sort of go on the top here for the strobe, for the flashing, rotating light effect. I'll get this circuit stuck in here with a bit of resin and then work out the switch and everything. But you know, it all seems to be working okay. The one thing that if you're sort of following along, if you're doing a similar thing to what I'm doing with this, I ended up having to paint the cage a couple of times, and the reason for that is because even though I used Mr. Surfacer Grey to prime this, it wasn't enough to light block it. So I was getting light coming through on the front side of it. So I ended up having to paint black and then paint the Mr. Surfacer over the top of it, and then paint some white and then paint some yellow, just so that there was no sort of light bleeding through from this LED, because it is quite bright and of course it emits light all the way around. So just be aware of that. Okay, so time to attach the spinning LED effect circuit into the clear orange part. So I'm going to use the stuff I usually do, this sort of cheap UV resin. Put a little bit out on my palette here. I'm going to use a toothpick. I'm just going to put a little bit on the edges. Enough to catch the circuit. It's the other way. I might actually blue tack this down just so it doesn't move as I get this set up. The circuit facing down. Yeah, I'm going to hit it with the UV lamp. Alright, let's have a look and see how well that worked. So it seems to be sort of in there pretty good. Let's plug it in and see if we got centered, because if we didn't, that's going to be a problem. That looks pretty convincing. That's about as good as it's going to get, I reckon, but definitely a lot better than just a straight sort of strobe. Now I know I've seen some sort of other builds people have done of this kit, and where they've frosted the inside of the clear orange part, but in the movie it's not frosted, it's actually clear and you can see the revolving light. So I kind of figure it's not quite right, but at least the circuit in there sort of gives a bit of an impression that you know, there's something going on there. I've soldered up the lights, so you can see a little fluoro in there, you can see they're flashing light, and it's still sort of held together with hopes and dreams at the moment, but the battery's sort of sitting inside this part of it. Just to give you an idea of the fluoro light, I've got Ripley here. Of course she's not completely painted, but if I put her there, you can sort of see how it's going to light up her face. So her face isn't going to be in darkness, which is kind of a nice way of doing it, I think. and it kind of matches what's going on in the film. Yeah, so pretty happy with the way that's come up. Now to show you what's going on the inside, because there's a bit of a rat's nest going on. So let's try and take this out. And I haven't really made anything sort of permanent yet. So I've got a switch here, which I think I might just end up mounting on the back of this plate. And if I pull this out, you should be able to pop this out. And so you can see there's a battery hiding in there. There we go. It's just got jiggled around to pop it out. So I've just rigged up sort of a plug to plug into the actual battery. And in the back here, it's probably a bit difficult to see, but there's all the wiring. So, you know, like I did with breadboard, it was just literally a resistor hooked up to each of the lights, the switch, and then of course the lead comes out the bottom. So, you know, nothing sort of amazing in there. There's no sort of Arduino stuff or anything like that. It's yeah. So I'm pretty happy with the way that it looks, and I think, you know, with a couple of resistors on it, this battery should last a while, you know, if I was able to sort of display this thing for an extended period of time. So now that everything's gloss coated, the electronics are sorted, I think I'll call it quits there at this video, and the next video will be about the weathering and also the painting of Ripley and the sort of final assembly with the hoses and pipes and what have you. So on that note, I will see you in the next video. Catch you later.